guys? My name is Josh, and today we're going to be talking about the HE1000se. So full disclosure here, Hifiman did loan this to me to review, and of course they're not paying, asking, or otherwise trying to influence what I say in any way at all. All thoughts and opinions are my own. Okay, so the beginning portion of this is actually going to be a bit of a consciousness stream, and I have some thoughts about all of these, and I want to talk about that, but I don't really have a specific structure for it. So if you're just curious about more of the kind of the meat and potatoes of the video, if you're one of those people who's like, shut up, Josh, get to the point, just go ahead and skip to this time code, and that'll get you over there. So this is a very expensive headphone, and it's kind of weird to put it in perspective on some other costs of some other things. So this is $3,500. Now this headphone is $350, which is the Hifiman Sundara. And then this headphone is the Hifiman Aria, which is $1,600. What's crazy is how different the prices are. So for example, the difference in price between this headphone and this headphone is significantly less than the price difference between the $1,600 headphone and this $3,500 headphone. Now to put that in a couple other ways, you could buy 10 of these for the cost of that HE1000se, and you could buy 2 of these for the cost of the HE1000se. In fact, you could buy 2 of these and the Sundara, and it would cost you only $50 more than buying the HE1000se. Now, speaking of the SE part, I've heard a lot of people call it like the special edition. I looked on Hifiman's website and in the manual that comes with this, and I actually can't see special edition listed anywhere. I think it might, maybe, I'm not 100% sure, I could have missed something, but I think it might stand for stealth edition. And the reason why it's stealth is because the kind of the stealth magnets that are in there, which we'll talk about in just a second. Now, I only bring that up because some people were calling it kind of the V3 of the HE1000, kind of HE1000 V3 because of the V1, V2, and then the SE. I kind of agree with that. Like, it might as well be the version 3, especially because they didn't come out with a version 3. And I believe this is about $1,000 more expensive than the version 2 is currently. So it's definitely like the more upgraded model. And it's actually the second to highest end headphone that Hifiman makes in terms of planars. The only other one being the Susvara at $6,000. Now what the SE kind of is somewhat of a mix between the HE1000 V2 and the Susvara. So what I can gather on the website here is that what they took from the Susvara or borrowed from the Susvara is somewhat of the magnet structure. I don't think they took the whole magnet structure of the Susvara and just put it in here. I think they just used some of the ideas about the technology and implemented it into this headphone. And that's because they use the stealth magnets, which is really just a fancy way of saying rounded magnets. That's really all they are. They're supposed to be, instead of kind of squared off like most of the planar magnets that you see on the market, they're kind of rounded on the outside so that they're a little bit more kind of acoustically invisible. Now, I'd actually be really curious to hear the version of the same magnet structure, basically the same headphone, but without the rounded magnets. I am curious how much of a difference it makes. You know, it could be a lot or, you know, very minor, but it is kind of cool to see the higher end tech, even at, you know, the $6,000 tech kind of trickled down a little bit to the still very, very pricey, you know, $3,500 headphone. Now, when it comes to planar technology, I would like to know a lot more, but I'm not a reference point for any sort of planar information. But I personally do find the magnets kind of interesting, and I'm not going to make any conclusions here, just more observations. But so with the Sundara, they're only on the outside, and they're those kind of lines, and you can see they're kind of spaced, you know, pretty close together. I'd say about 1/8 of an inch each. Maybe even a little bit less, you know, from one another, and they're only on one side. Now with the Aria, it's slightly different. Not only is it double-sided, but you do see that they're kind of spaced, and if it's not showing up well here, I will take B-roll of it, but it is spaced about the same. So you have these squared off magnets that are kind of spaced about the same distance as the Sundara. But what's interesting is that the flip side is asymmetrical. So the inside magnet structure, they're somewhat close together, but you can actually see that they're very, very thin, and they're not the thicker magnets. So they use smaller magnets on the inside ear cup than they do on the outside ear cup. And if I'm not mistaken, although I'm pulling it from memory and, you know, it's not really that important, but I think that that's a similar situation to what the HE1000 V2 used. Similar though, I don't think it's exactly the same magnets pulled in, pulled out. So where this gets interesting for me is the use of the magnets on the HE1000se. So it's a little bit harder to see. So you'll just have to take my word for it if it doesn't show up in video. But the magnet structure on the back is spaced about just the same as on the Aria. And they're kind of, the regular size, but they're rounded. But on the inside of the ear cup, they use the fuller size magnets, but they spread them further apart, like quite a bit further. Rather than using the smaller magnets like the Aria uses, they just use the regular magnets, but they space them out further. I'm curious what would happen if you took the magnets of one and applied them to a different headphone. Like if we swapped the magnet structure of the Aria and put it on the SE, and we took the SE structure and put it on the Sundara, I am curious what would happen. So when we talk about sound, I'll bring up the Sundara and the Aria again, but I do want to talk a little bit about the build of this. You got a metal headband on the top, and that metal continues down all the way to the arms for the actual ear cup and the grill itself and this surround here. Now it goes from a brushed steel look to, I can't tell if it's aluminum or steel, but it goes to a more anodized look, and it doesn't look the absolute best. I'm not gonna lie, like it looks a little cheap compared to the price, but when you hold it, when you actually feel it, you do get a much more kind of premium feel than what it would look like. It still looks pretty nice, especially with the wood kind of wrap on the outside here, but overall looks and feel and build quality is about average for the price. One benefit that this does have over some other flagships is the weight. So this only comes in at 430 or 440 grams. And to put that in comparison to some other flagship headphones, the LCD4 weighs about 730 grams. So this is 300 grams lighter than the LCD4. Now, another thing I think we should probably talk about is gonna be the case. So this is the case that it comes in. It's got kind of this metal cover here, and then kind of this, I don't know, probably fake leather wrap, I think. It's nice, it's big. You can't take it mobile or anything. But the headphone does come with 3 cables that are, kind of crap. Like, it's nice to have the 3 cables, and the cables are very lightweight, but they have this, they kind of feel like a condom. Like, for lack of a better descriptive term, they just feel like a really thick condom. They're really lightweight, and they come with a short 3.5, a long 1/4 inch, and a long XLR balance cable. So I do appreciate having 3 cables that come with it. That's pretty nice, especially at the price. I think when you're paying that much for a headphone, companies really have to kind of feed you a little bit more in the box. Some other things of note here is the clamp pressure is actually a bit stronger than something like the Aria or the Sundara. Not by a lot, just a little bit stronger. And I think it has to do with this metal bar up here. I think it just has either a different metal being used or just bent a little bit stronger than some of the others, because it is a little bit clampy. Not really bad. Actually, I find the clamp to be quite pleasing on this. It feels very secure, but without creating a lot of pressure. Now, I do want to talk about sound here really quick, but at first I want to mention that these planars, these big planars, when you first get them, they really do need to burn in. And my buddy DMS actually has a great video about burn-in. He measured it and everything. It's a good video. There's going to be a link in the description down below. I definitely recommend going and checking it out. These are no different than most other headphones and definitely most other planars. Now, Hifiman seems to have a tendency of being a little bit sharp or bright when you first get their headphones. And so I think a lot of people might get them and think that they're gonna sound that way forever. Just give them like 100 hours of burn-in. I know that seems like a lot, but just leave it playing for a couple days. It doesn't have to be crazy loud or anything. Put it in a box or something like that and just let it play. And you'll see it kind of evolve over time. It's really quite cool to actually listen to it. But because I'm only about halfway through that burn-in process right now, and this is gonna be a first impressions, there's some things that haven't changed at all really that much since the burn-in process started. And those are the things I wanna talk about, and the things that are currently changing, I wanna avoid until the review, because I don't wanna say, for example, the treble response has this characteristic, but then maybe that's gone by the time I get to the full review. And I don't wanna be throwing people back and forth between what they should think of this headphone. So I'm just gonna be talking about the stuff that so far hasn't changed. And I guess that's gonna start me with the detail and the informative nature of this headphone, because let me take it back a little bit. So when I was first getting into this hobby, and I think like a lot of people are, start to have to like rationalize $300 headphones, and you're like that's a lot, right? That's quite crazy. And then you get it and it's amazing and it's mind-blowing. But then you have this perception, this perceived kind of sound that you think that the real high-end headphones are gonna get. And this is a totally personal thing. This is gonna be something where, you know, you have this kind of idealized sound signature. And for me, when I've tried these other flagship headphones like the Empyrean, you know, like the LCD4, like the HE1000se, these brand flagships, while they are fantastic and I give them full marks for their sound quality, and they all have their unique approach to sounding good, they've all been kind of a letdown based off of what I was assuming the sound signature would be. And I know that that's not a fair mark against them, and I'm not going to hold that against them for my own perception of what I thought they were going to be. But everything has been kind of a little bit of a letdown towards my initial assumption, basically, of what sound was going to be like. And the HE1000 is probably the closest to what I would imagine those headphones to be like. And it has to do with the informative, like hyper detailed nature of this headphone. Now, this headphone seems to sacrifice some things in the name of that detail retrieval. And that's one thing that has been a big kind of me battling this headphone back and forth between, you know, loving it and hating it because of how informative it is. And I'll give you a good example. So there's been somewhere in between, I would say 20 to 30 songs where I thought I broke the headphone. And I had that oh shit moment of like, did I just break a $3,500 headphone? Crap. Like, that's not good. And then I realized that it's actually something that's happening in the recording that doesn't sound right. So maybe the bass has like an artifacting to it that sounds like the crinkling of a driver or something like that. And then I'll like reverse the cables and then listen on a different headphone and crank it all the way up just to hear that one thing. And I'm like, oh, okay, it's actually in the music, but it wasn't thrown out in an obvious way with these other headphones. And then this headphone, just being a really detailed headphone, was able to display it in such a clear way that it was actually kind of breaking that fourth wall, so to speak. Now, while I think the detail of this headphone is extraordinarily impressive, there is still the big question of whether or not you actually like the sound signature that it has. Now, I suspect what's actually happening here is that the driver is responsible for most of the detail, not necessarily how it's tuned. Because you can adjust the EQ, and this thing handles EQ like an absolute monster. And if you want to make this thing have nothing above 10K and just, you know, whomping thick bass response under 300 hertz, you can do that very, very easily, and you can get a very pleasing result from that if that's what you're after. So it doesn't seem to be driver limited in any way. But it does seem to be the tuning of it that is kind of in question here for me. Now, the basic delivery of this is pretty even, pretty much all across the board, but it has some pretty amazing dynamic range everywhere. And that allows sharp piercing sounds to unfortunately sound sharp and piercing, and, you know, low thumping notes to sound low and thumping, and they can really shine through the music. Or if they're not portrayed that way in the mix, they're going to kind of be more of an underlying thing. It's very capable. It's a very capable headphone. Now, one thing that is in the works of changing a little bit is the treble response. And so I don't want to exactly give a finite interpretation of what I'm hearing just yet, but it's pretty forward. And I am hoping that changes because I have this new Aria here, and I have about the same amount of listening time, and the highs on this headphone have definitely cooled down a lot. And the HE1000 has not cooled down as much, but it has a little bit. So I'm expecting that to get a little bit better because it is pretty forward right now, and it's not always the most pleasing thing. Now, one thing that hasn't changed at all, which does usually change with a lot of the Hifimans I've got to do a burn-in on, is the bass response. The bass response has maintained basically the same sound, same delivery style that I remember hearing when I very first got this. I don't think it's changed at all. And because of that, I don't expect it to change in the future. And I'd be kind of worried if it changed rapidly at this point anyways. So the bass response on this continues with that characteristic of speed and information. It is beyond impressive how much detail is in the bass response. And that's one of the areas that you most often hear a lot of the issues. There are songs where I never knew that the bass response was as distorted as it was. Like like artifacting distortion. And then I'll go and listen to another headphone that I may consider to have extraordinarily good bass, and I barely even notice that distortion. It's there, but it's real far in the background, you know, and it's rooted really deep to where you have to search for it to even know that it exists. And then I'll listen to the HE1000 and it's obvious. And it's so obvious that it actually causes you to kind of be pulled out of your music a little bit. Okay, and then the last thing I want to talk about is going to be the imaging and Soundstage, which doesn't seem to be evolving that much. And I don't really find myself to be that impressed with the soundstaging portion. The imaging is very, 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 very good. But when you have something like a Aria, which is less than half the cost, and this is able to kind of soundstage both wider than the HE1000 and have a more depthful forward hitting experience. So things are able to kind of seem bigger and broader in scale because it has a more surrounding delivery. And then when you compare that HE1000se to something like an HE1000se, which I have over there, the soundstage width is just completely dominant on the HE1000 side. I think part of why this headphone is so detailed is because of that closeness factor. Because everything is really happening kind of like there's a decent bit of soundstage compared to you know, an HD600 or a 6XX. There's quite a bit, but when you compare it to some other really good soundstaging headphones, especially for the price, it doesn't really compete on that level, I don't think. And that's really the only thing that I would wish to be more impressive. Now, it's also, you know, it's notably important to say that it might be that lacking characteristic that is able to give life to other characteristics like the detail. Because let's say you back the soundstage up, you know, perceivably a couple more feet, just for example, just like it's illusioning a couple more feet worth of width. You know, how much information loss do you have at that point? And is that a sacrifice that is worth making? Or is it better to have the more intimate nature and just hear everything? The question that I have in my head on whether to tell people to buy this or not comes down to one question with two answers. Do you like all the information or do you like most of the information? And if you like all the information, that's your top priority. I think this is a fantastic headphone for that so far. That may change, but as of right now, it's very good for that. Now, if there's other things that you prioritize, like soundstage, or maybe a mid-range warmth, or maybe a deeper bass response, or, you know, this or that reason, and you just want most of the information and you value those other things above absolute total information over everything, then there are some other options that I would definitely recommend over this, like the LC4, like the HE1000se if you're into soundstage, like the Aria if you're into a warmer sound signature. There's a lot of other headphones that I think do some other specific things quite a bit better, but so far, this thing's kind of claim to fame is the detail retrieval, and I'm having a great time with it. So I'm looking forward to burning it in more and giving you guys a full review when I have that ready. And then also be doing a couple comparisons while it's here as well. Okay, guys, I think that's gonna wrap it up. Sorry for my voice. I reviewed the first half a couple days ago and I had to review the second half later. I got sick, so I apologize for my voice not being quite normal and probably gross sounding. So anyways, thank you very much for watching. Until the next video, my name is Josh, signing off.